Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
A big warm welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Now, I'm conscious you're listening to a podcast today, but a question I must ask is, how do you listen to your music? Is it Spotify or even Apple Music? And when you listen to your favourite song, do you think about how the artist gets paid? Or do you just automatically assume that they do, like I did? I recently discovered that this is rarely the case. And actually, the world of licensing and royalty rights is extremely complex. Although digital music platforms seem fresh and exciting, under the hood there are still many pain points left behind from the old way of doing things. Step forward a new startup called Loudr, and they're attempting to solve two problems: helping musicians get licenses that until recently would have been super challenging to obtain on their own, and secondly, Loudr is utilising machine learning to identify rights holders. I think it's a great story for music fans and lovers of tech, and how it's actually removing friction points from every industry now. So buckle up, hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way to San Francisco so we can speak with Chris Crawford, the CEO of Loudr. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Chris. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Chris Crawford. I'm the CEO of a company called Loudr, and what we do is we create technology efficiencies for the age-old music industry problem of paying royalties to the right person. Something that most people assume, that when you stream or download a track, that all of the songwriters that own a piece of that composition will receive a royalty. But unfortunately, the case is, as music has expanded in the digital ecosystem, there have been a lot of songwriters, especially on the independent side, that have been left behind. And part of that is due to insufficient data or outdated licensing processes. And so we build technology to address those issues.
Like you mentioned there, it's my understanding that Loudr builds products and services that all help content creators, aggregators and music services all identify rights holders and secure those mechanical licenses, and more importantly, pay royalties to music publishers.
Yep.
But just in case I have missed anything out there, can you expand on it a little more and also advise what problems Loudr is actually solving, and essentially what makes it unique from everything else out there?
Yeah, so a good way to think about this is that we solve music rights headaches. So depending on who is afflicted with the headache, it's a slightly different solution. But for example, if you're an artist who has recorded a cover song, you can secure the license that lets you sell copies of it here in the US. If you're a label manager or producer, you can do this on behalf of several artists. If you're a distribution company or an aggregator, you can integrate this feature into your platform. And if you're a music service, that's where it gets really interesting, because your typical streaming service has now between 40 and 50 million sound recordings. And those recordings that fall outside of the public domain generate royalties to the underlying songwriters. So their headache in this flow is that the information comes in about the recording from the labels or the distribution companies, whereas information for the composition lives with either the publisher, a rights society, or the actual songwriter. And so they are responsible for marrying that information. Or in the industry, we typically call it linking, except the French call it coupling. And that information, since it typically isn't bundled, they are responsible for doing that link either in-house, so companies like Google and YouTube do it in-house, or by hiring a third-party rights administrator. So for example, Spotify has hired the Harry Fox agency to do this work, to connect the sound recordings to the correct composition so the songwriters can be paid.
Now, I'm always fascinated where ideas like Loudr actually originate from and the inspiration behind it. So I've got to ask, what's the story behind Loudr? I mean, was that business created out of your own frustrations and you were set out to right a few wrongs in the music industry, or is there another story behind it?
Yeah, there is. Loudr actually came from a bit of a surprising place, and that's a cappella music.
Oh, okay.
Back in 2009, there were 6 a cappella albums on the iTunes store. And the reason that the others weren't there is because they didn't have the appropriate rights. Most a cappella recordings are cover songs, so recordings where the artist typically controls the rights of the recording, but not the underlying composition. So our solution was to fix that rights problem and basically open up the ability for cover songs to experience the same music ecosystem as original songs. And we originally launched the company as a cappella records to sound like the most legitimate thing going on in a cappella music at the time. We launched it the same day that Glee came out, the television show Glee in the US, which was completely coincidental, not part of the master plan at all, just a lucky coincidence. And we set about working with the collegiate a cappella groups across the country to upload their master recordings, secure the appropriate rights to the compositions, and then distribute it to the stores. And the value proposition was that every time it sells, we will pay the songwriters and publishers first, and then do a revenue share with the artists. But that ended up evolving into different genres, such as video game covers and working with a bunch of YouTube stars that build their career off of cover songs. And at that point, we rebranded the company Loudr. Also, we were thankful that we no longer had to ask people to try to spell the word a cappella, because even some of the most diehard fans don't know that it's 2 P's, 2 L's, and 2 words, and it made emailing us very, very challenging. And so we rebranded it as Loudr and opened it up to all independent artists. And that's how we were able to build a team, raise some money, build a pretty good business in the world of independent artists. But as we got closer and closer to the streaming services, we started hearing about how big a problem this was at their scale. So with their 40 plus million sound recordings, actually mapping all those to the correct composition and ensuring the right songwriters are paid. And so they encouraged us to go into the enterprise space, and at the beginning of last year we sold our distribution business, and we focused exclusively on enterprise rights clearance and songwriter royalty payments.
Now, when this podcast is over, if I was to go on iTunes and search for a cappella groups now, is there going to be several albums by Chris Crawford there with you smiling on the front cover?
There are a few recordings that I am on, but I'm not going to tell you which. I'm just going to let you presume it's the best ones you come across. But our efforts resulted in thousands of a cappella albums making it to the platforms. And so for the a cappella community, we felt that it was a really big win, because in especially the collegiate a cappella world here in the US, a lot of groups take their favorite songs and they create their own arrangements of these songs. So now having access to this great library of recordings on places like Apple Music and Spotify, of hearing how other people have arranged those songs, is encouraging more and more people to sort of do research before setting out on their own arrangement. So it's something that I wish I'd had back when I was arranging a cappella music in college, but now it is available.
Oh, excellent. Now, on a more serious note, am I right in saying that Loudr has already distributed over $1 million in royalties to songwriters and music publishers all over the world? Is that right?
Yes. And so we just entered the enterprise business at the beginning of last year, but we were thrilled that we've distributed over 1 million, and we also put that number out as a benchmark, because so much of what we're doing is building quickly, and we also want to be able to articulate as we are growing, as we are working with more and more publishers and more services, how that is growing over time. So we're thrilled to be over 1 million, but also we see that as just getting started, so to speak.
Now, I also recently read that Zebralution, or Zebralution over here in the UK, partnered with Loudr for mechanical licensing and royalty services. I mean, can you tell me more about that partnership and how it benefits both of your companies, really, and indeed the users themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. So Zebralution is one of the premier European digital distribution companies. They're based in Berlin, over in Germany, and this year they spun out of Warner after a 10-year ownership relationship to create a truly independent option for the independent community. And so we work with them to secure the appropriate clearances, here known as the mechanical license clearances. For every track they distribute to the US, calculate the royalties, and pay the publishers and songwriters based on those royalties generated.
So copyright laws, really, for mechanical licenses in particular, and music downloads, are notoriously complex. So what kind of technology do you use to help simplify that cumbersome process? I mean, is it centered around big data processors and machine learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. So initially we did everything by hand. And as our operations scaled upward and the number of incoming requests increased exponentially, we needed sheer necessity to shift our resources away from doing stuff by hand and towards creating a machine to basically think and act like a human music researcher might. And so our machine, the Loudr database and the Loudr algorithms, understands the complexity of mechanical licensing, both the compliance side and the operational side. And it's working every hour of every day because our clients are hooked up to Loudr through an API connection. So we don't have to be in the office for requests to come in, be mapped against the correct composition, and return a license status to our clients. So that's all happening in real time and through this technology. But where the big data and machine learning elements come into play is that the big data is we now understand all this information about the compositions based on all the work we've done and all the feeds we receive from the publishers. And then we have all this information about all those requests and how we've linked them and all the relationships between songwriters and artists, between songwriters and publishers, to inform the confidence around a particular match. And as more stuff comes through the system and more matches are made, that's actually informing the strength of those various relationships. So that's where the machine learning bit comes into play. Just like every time you use, well, I guess, fortunately, the UK, you guys don't have Pandora yet, but if you were in the US, every time you use your thumb up, thumb down, or skip a track, you're giving an input into your taste, and it's adjusting all those attributes. So if you think about it, every time a match is made, whether that's done purely by the technology or by the technology with the assistance of a human, it's affecting the inputs and making the whole system stronger and more intelligent.
Now, you already mentioned a few moments ago the struggles about making your work actually visible on platforms such as Apple Music. But before Loudr, I mean, how challenging was it for musicians to actually obtain their own licenses? Because it sounds like you had your own personal experience there with it. I mean, was it really difficult, or was it just non-existent?
It was optimized for the world of physical media.
Yeah.
So it was great for physical CDs, vinyls, and cassettes, where you knew how many you were going to create at the first run, because typically you could go to an agency like the Harry Fox agency here in the U.S. and say, well, I'm making 1,000 CDs and I need 1,000 licenses for this song. And if they had that composition in their database, it is a relatively straightforward process. But where it became difficult is for digital downloads. You don't know how many you're going to sell. I've never met anybody who's been able to correctly predict how many downloads their recording will get over a period of time. So when digital downloads came in, there wasn't an option for just securing a license without the prediction and having a mechanism to compensate publishers as sales were made, at least not on the independent side. So that was the headache we initially set out to solve, so that people weren't predicting and essentially weren't being put in positions where they would be wrong.
Now, listening to you talk about Loudr, though, I'm going to attempt to join a few dots, because I recently read how Spotify is battling a series of lawsuits right now over the failure to correctly identify rights holders and pay royalties to who they're owed. Light bulb moment. So if companies like Spotify were to use Loudr's API, they could easily find, manage and link musical compositions to their owners, and possibly even calculate royalties based on their specific parameters automatically. I mean, have you or do you foresee any conversations with music streaming services such as Spotify in the near future? Or is that just a bit of a loaded question? Obviously, you'd be open for that. But
no, it's a great question. I mean, in all honesty, we are in talks with most of the largest streaming platforms to address their open concerns, as well as collaborate on various expansion opportunities. But unfortunately, at this stage, I can't say more than that.
Oh, a teaser. That means you've got to come back on in 6 months now. See what you've done there. So seriously, though, what's next for Loudr? I mean, how do you see that platform evolving over the next few years, without revealing too much, of course?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see it centered around some core goals. And really everything we do is around these goals. One is paying the correct songwriter 100% of what they've earned. And we're very focused on that in the U.S. just because there is so much in the U.S. that is not going to the correct songwriter. And so every time we look at that pipeline of a song being streamed on a major platform, to the revenue being generated, to who it flows to, how it's reported, how the various ownership breaks down, and what the end result is to the songwriter, when are they getting 100% of what they should and when are they not? And what can our technology do to assist in getting the correct amount all the way through? So that's one big area that we're continuing to build a lot of tools around. Another is creating smart efficiencies in the clearance process. A big problem for digital services today is that when they have a new recording that's come from the label, has a very specific street date or launch date, the label is expecting that to go live on that date. However, for the platforms, they are responsible for securing the composition rights. So the label has granted them the recording rights, but they are essentially given a task to secure the composition rights, or the publishing rights, by the time the street date commences. And if they cannot, they are faced with a choice. And that choice is, well, do I release it on time so that the label is happy, hoping that the rights on the publishing side will get worked out down the road or before the first report, or do I delay the release until I can secure a license on the publishing side and basically follow the U.S. copyright law as it instructs? And what we're seeing is that different services make different choices, and some work out well, some don't. But at Loudr, we want that dilemma to be removed entirely. We don't think it's fair that services are put in that position. And so we've been developing a lot of tools to make that process much faster, including a lot of really cool predictive publishing, data analysis, and ways to sort of pre-secure licenses with publishers so that street date is always hit.
Excellent. So if we do have any musicians listening today, can you advise how they can find out more information about Loudr, and also how they can contact you or a member of your team if they have any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So musicians, please check us out at loudr.fm, FM like a radio station. If you're seeking licenses or a more efficient way to handle your publishing obligations, I encourage you to check out our do-it-yourself platform, Loudr Licensing, or drop us a line at support@loudr.fm. We do make occasional updates on social media, Loudr on Twitter or Loudr FM on Facebook. We're not particularly good, in all honesty, about updates on the social media stuff. So we are in the process of launching a newsletter to give a bit more behind the scenes when there's actually newsworthy news to send out.
Well, I always say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. But what I love about what you're doing there is you're using technology to bring musicians together and actually help them obtain their own licenses so they can actually get paid, which is a fantastic thing. And I really do salute you for everything you're doing there. So thanks for coming on today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I love how Loudr has used machine learning to speed up matching between sound recordings and compositions so that songwriters can be compensated, something that other companies have struggled to implement over the years. And I don't mind admitting that before speaking with Chris today, I did not know about many of the problems facing new recording artists. Essentially, Loudr is solving two problems that I assumed were already being managed. But you know what? I could not have been more wrong. I mean, on the artist side, Loudr are now securing mechanical licenses for independent artists. And on the business side, they're helping DSPs, content creators and aggregators identify and pay rights holders. So a big thank you to Chris Crawford for sharing the story about Loudr today. But I'm off to record my own a cappella song now and push him down the iTunes charts. Only joking, Chris. Seriously though, a big thank you to everyone listening today. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.